let me introduce to you Stefan Lohfeld, who, from my way of pronouncing his name, is clearly not a US native, but I'm not either. So he works in oral and craniofacial sciences in the School of Dentistry at materials that they call smart material implants. Since I have a number of implants, I'd like to know how I can upgrade. Thank you.
Thank you very much for the introduction. Yeah, regarding the name pronunciation, I appreciate your European way to say it from our neighbor country. So that's all fine. I rarely hear my name properly pronounced here in the States, but that's okay. I love you all. So my ECFA application proposal was about knowledge transfer, and this might be a bit more technical than the previous presentation, but we all want to learn something. We want to talk about knowledge transfer some knowledge to you. Want to talk about smart materials. Smart people like smart materials, and there is a certain group which is called the shape memory metal alloys. And you might not be exposed as much to these materials as you are to natural disasters. But anyway, we see them all around. Can this video run? It actually should be repeating.
Repeating? I don't know.
Now I can progress. So there we go. Yeah. So these materials made from metal alloys have either a shape memory effect, which means they can remember a shape that was initially set to them, and we can recover the material under certain conditions to that shape, or they can have super elasticity, so we actually can compress like a spring further than we would normally be able to because something is going on in the material, which is a phase transformation. For these materials is a martensitic that's just like really going down to the elements of materials. So a phase change within the material happens, and that allows for extra movement, for instance. Examples of these alloys are nitinol, which is pretty common, particularly in dentistry. There are orthodontic wires being used. There are vascular stents in other medical applications, guide wires. Then there are some aluminum alloys also have the same opportunity to show these memory effects. But not only in medicine these materials are being used, but also pipe couplings, vibration dampers, and so on. So there are quite a few applications for those materials. However, they're not very common or not very widespread because the materials are pretty expensive. And what you see here in the video is they have this deformed spring, and then it's not compressing it, but just by the heat of the hand, this material goes through a phase transformation and goes back into its original shape. So they don't do anything but applying heat from the hand to it. The fact that they are compressing it, seem to compress it, is just to add a little bit more heat to get to the final shape. So metals are expensive. Metals are not necessary, or these metals are expensive, necessary, easy to handle. So talking about shape memory polymers, which also can have this effect, there are certain advantages for polymers in general. They're lightweight. They have a very high shape recovery capability, so we can do more deformation without destroying them. They are easy to manipulate, like the chemists, they just add some more stuff to it and they have a different polymer which has new features. And particularly for my applications, they can be biodegradable, so they dissolve within the body, which is good for an implant which you want to replace with natural tissue in the end. And you don't want to, like, if someone has a spinal fixation, so there are metal screws in the spine or so, they normally don't take them out because it's another operation that they want to avoid. But actually, if it's not needed anymore, they would prefer if it is out. So that would be an advantage of any polymer that can degrade in the body over time while it's being replaced with new tissue. One group of these shape memory polymers are thermoresponsive, which means they react to temperature changes. They might also, some others might react to humidity, to light, to whatever trigger that could be, magnetic fields or so. And these thermoresponsive polymers usually have two different phases, a soft and a hard phase, or two phases that have different melting temperatures. So one gets soft before the other one, which helps like regaining a shape from the one that is actually not affected by the current heat. And the soft one allows this movement after deformation. So that could be, for instance, of one polymer, a glycerine or the glassy-phase, or as it can be two different polymers that have different temperatures. It might also work with just one single polymer, which you can deform and then set that shape, that deformed shape, and then you heat it up or you activate it, and it goes back to that. For using near-infrared light responsive materials that react to a certain wavelength of light, you add some nanoparticles that are actually responsive to these to this wavelength. So the polymer itself does not react to it, but once you add your nanoparticles to it, they take this energy from the light in, and then they start to heat up, and actually they heat the material locally, which means if you spread these nanoparticles only certain sections of an implant, you can deform it only in those sections. So how these materials or implants are being made, first you set a shape during the production where you're working on a temperature that is higher than any of the melting temperatures that you have. You have a kind of a liquid or semi-liquid compound. Once that is set, you can heat it up, warm it a little bit so to get into a soft state. You deform it, you hold it in that place like the deformed one, and let it cool in this deformed shape. And because then it's hard again, it won't go back to the shape. Then you activate with near-infrared light, and the original shape will be restored. The beauty of this process is it's very high controllable, because as soon as I take the light away, the material cools down. If I just have thermoresponsive, I put it into the body, I use the body heat to deform it, 37 degrees C, it will always do this. If it actually has a higher temperature that it reacts to, that is only activated by the near-infrared light, then I can take the light away and my implant will stop moving, which can be very helpful if you think about pediatric patients which are still growing. You don't want the full movement of an implant at any stage. You don't want to expand it completely. So you can go in steps. And this is from a group who developed this material, and they just showed, like, they had the different materials and they activated with the infrared light. So they have a very focus on that. They can fold down leaf by leaf without any contact. So that is another nice thing. There was no contact because it's just light. They just have to have access to that. So they do stuff like that. And there are a few more examples just showing that how they can bring it back to the original shape. What you can see possibly in here, all these materials were just flatly printed, and they call this 4D printing because they can make any shape. And there is a fourth dimension in it. Over time, they can activate it. So all these figurines were kind of flat, and then they bend it down, and then they activated, bringing it back to the original flat shape as it was produced. Applications that I would like when I heard about this material and they were looking for applications, I was just working on a project that is funded by first the Faculty Excellence Fund here from UMKC and Entrepreneurship Innovation Grant. So I'm working in dentistry, and there is one procedure which I want to explain here. When you have pulled or lost any molar or premolar tooth, it might be that the bone resorbs by the pressure from the sinus cavity. So in this area, this hole isn't supposed to be there. It's just because there is no load onto this bone anymore. And once you actually decide to get a dental implant, there's not enough bone for the dentist to put the implant into. So they have to regrow this bone series, this bone material. And what they do for that is they create an axis from the side, and they lift the sinus membrane, the membrane that lines your sinus cavity, lift it off the bone, fill it with some material that helps with bone formation, and then they grow new bone in this area, and then there is enough material to actually put an implant into that. The thing is, with this procedure, there are about like 60% of the cases, they cause a sinus membrane perforation. So they create a little hole in that, which can be a tiny patch on, and it will be fine. But it also might cause sinus infections if it's better. It might mean that they have to interrupt the procedures. They cannot go on with placing the implant in the first place, and you have to wait for several weeks. And sinus infection might have any effect. Even the newly grown bone after that might not hold as, or the implant in that newly grown bone might not be so secure as it should be. So I was wondering, what if we simplify this procedure by working with manual instruments, by lifting the membrane slowly off of the bone. So it's kind of glued to it. It's not very hard to get it off, but it's neither just loose. So they come in with this tool and they go in, not scrape it off, but lift it off like with a spoon that you put up all the time. So the idea is just to use, like create a little pocket and then have an implant inserted here that expands over time. Ideas would be anything that expands elastically, so I can compress it, put it in, and then let it expand. Could be a foam, could be like a spring like here, or this little palm tree that is supposed to be flat and then comes up and unfolds this to create a dome, because this dome is needed for this area to grow new bone. And this, in my case, would be biodegradable, so new bone is formed here in this area, and the actual implant is consumed during that. Using a material that actually I can activate with near-infrared light means that I don't have to do a lot of chemistry with this material to ensure it's expanding in a certain speed. I just take the light away, it stops. Give it some time to membrane to adapt and not to rupture. So that is the idea behind it. We can stop it at any place. We can do it all in one go within like 30 minutes or 15 minutes, whatever the surgeon prefers. We use this material in some trial to see with light. You think about, okay, this is in the body. How do I even get there with my light? Infrared light can penetrate tissues. So we can actually shine the light outside the body and we will affect an implant that is behind tissue layers, behind the skin, behind some muscle tissue, maybe even bone. We have to see that. So we put that into our model and activated it from the outside. And we figured out, like after 15 minutes of irradiation, this heavily bent plate became almost flat in up to 3 centimeter depth, like more than an inch depth within the tissue. So that works, concept proven. So that works. Now we have to see with other tissues how it works. We use a pretty simple infrared light source for that. So if you have medical grade stuff which has a higher energy, that will actually work better. So we're working on that, improving this. Then an ENT doctor approached me from UMKC. He had an idea for an implant that helps, again, with pediatric patients. When you have fluid buildup behind your eardrum, that will create a lot of pain. And this is when this tube actually isn't working anymore. And what they sometimes do is place a little tube through that eardrum. Particularly pediatric patients means like up to 2 years, where this tube isn't working very well for pressure normalization and fluid flow. So they always have these patients. With an adult, they can place it in the office. With a pediatric, with a child, they have to actually put it to sleep and general anesthesia, because then it's suddenly surgery. So he had an idea, how can we simplify that without having like to interact with the child too much? So the idea is, like, we have this implant. The only interaction directly with the child is placing it on the eardrum, and then you just use light. So there's no manual touching anymore. It doesn't matter that the child is moving its head, because, okay, the light source will go away, but you don't have any sharp instruments to create a hole in there. So the procedures he's talking about is laryngotomy and tympanostomy. This is just creating a hole. This is creating a hole and placing a little tube. And obviously, so the big chance would be for pediatric patients, where then suddenly any ENT doctor can do that in their office. They don't have to go into hospital anymore. Solution would be quick action without much manual interaction, as I explained, and they can do it there. So that is the second application that we're working on. We went through several prototypes how we can do this. So this is how it's being inserted, and once it's behind the eardrum, the leaves would fold out, or this is like a harmonica or accordion, just expands to push the tube through. This is a very simple design with a sharp tip which sticks to the eardrum and goes into that. And this is just showing again, like this, you see this red kind of background. This is from the near-infrared light. So particularly in the first few seconds, this is a very fast time-lapse recording, how the material moved up. Now, I've bent this material quite often, so actually it doesn't work that well anymore. But this is the idea, like putting it in, gluing it to the membrane, to the eardrum on this side, and then shining it with light, and then the pin will actually create the hole in the eardrum. So we have that sorted. Now I'm having in my lab just a setup how I actually try this material on an artificial eardrum. We're trying different foils, whatever is closest to the actual membrane. And the progress with these different applications that we're thinking about is we have two patent applications filed so far. One is for my sinus implant. The other one I'm also on with a ENT application for that. And the next steps would then be propose a preparation for any follow-up funding, which could be any of these company fundings, SBIR, STTR. Since the ENT doctor is not a professor, he's just a teaching professor here, so he can do that in his own company. Another application that we can think of, I'm actually working with an orthopedic surgeon in the School of Medicine, Hussam Bulusa, and there we're thinking about spinal cages. Again, we can create a smaller incision, put it in, and then once it's in place in the spine, it can expand by shining that light. So a lot of different applications from that. So how did I want to use the ECFA grant? So far, all this bulk material and 3D printed prototypes have been made by our partner, who have their lab in Massachusetts. And I wanted to learn more about how to make this material in the first place, so I better understand it. Like if I disassemble a car, I know how exactly the brakes work or so. That doesn't mean I can build a car, but I know how everything works much better. And the other thing is, it takes ages. When I do a simple change of the design of what I do, then getting the new prototypes in. If I can do that in my lab, would be very helpful. So I want to learn from them how to exactly do this. And the grant is supposed to cover the travel cost to visit them. So we would have a knowledge transfer of this technology to UMKC about the material composition. What exactly do I need to add based on their knowledge? What like secret ingredients they might not publish. They have a patent with Northeastern University on that. This lab actually has a license from Northeastern University to commercialize the material, so they will still be partner, because without them, I wouldn't be able to bring anything onto the market. But the benefits to us here are definitely it would speed up the manufacturing of new prototypes, and it allows much faster testing and revision of those prototypes. So far, actually, I have not used the money. My meetings with them were postponed a couple of times. My application said I'm going to go in June or July after coming from a conference where I met them, but he had to cancel that. I was then due to go end of December. When the person was hospitalized, unfortunately, I was supposed to go last Thursday, and again, there's something was in between. So this is moving on and on. I hope now in the next 2 weeks, I hopefully will be able to go there. Or early next month at the very latest. But meanwhile, I'm experimenting with basic formulations. So I'm getting there already with just some of the ingredients to get this movement activation with NIR light. So this is all very exciting. I think we have a very good application of this material, which they had, and then wondered, okay, now how can we use it? So I think it's a very good collaboration. And for that, I want to thank you first for listening today, and also for giving me the opportunity to learn more about the materials that I'm using. Thank you.
Okay. Who has a question for Stefan?
So at the very beginning, and I know this isn't directly in your stuff, but you said you can use these materials for vibration attenuation.
Yeah.
Roughly, how would that work?
I have not looked into that. Okay. So that was an application that I saw, but I can imagine, since these materials can be super elastic or so, just by changing, and that was for the metal ones, which I'm not working with, but just by changing, like super elasticity comes with pressure. So there is a chance either to activate them with temperature. This is what we do with the orthodontic wires. They are shaped at room temperature. They're easily to bend. They go into the mouth at 37, or at the temperature of the mouth, they actually tend to go back to their original shape. With super elasticity, you can compress a spring, for instance, or a damper to a certain degree, and then it gets pretty stiff. But this stress within the material causes this phase transformation. It goes to the softer state, and suddenly you have more way to move it. And I think this is how the dampening works, that they take it like in the reverse route of this phase transformation. This is, I think, how they do it. Any more questions?
Okay.
Well, I just
Yeah.
It's personal.
I'm gonna have a new knee in 2 years. Can we do anything about knees?
I worked on these a couple of years ago before I came to UMKC, so I'm not sure. Knee applications with that, I mean, this is a pretty rough procedure, and I know how exactly what they're doing with coming with the power tools, cutting out the current one and putting some metal and plastic into that. I don't think you would need any of these features, that material for that particular application. If it goes to like fixing the patella again, where you're working with ligaments and all this, yeah, there might actually be a chance for that. Not necessarily biodegradable, which is one feature that I would really like, but even if it's permanent in the body, but you can, the idea with the spinal cage as well is like, okay, it might be compressed by just normal loading from the person. Now I need to get it back to the original shape. Okay, they go into the clinic, they got some light shown on that, and it expands again. So that it's reversible. It can be done over and over again. But in the knee, I'm not sure how, but there are orthopedic applications where it could be used for. Yeah.
Stefan,
Okay.
thank you very much.
Thank you.